Hello, this is Writers at Work, a podcast for readers and writers about the joys, heartaches, challenges, and satisfaction of the creative writing process. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. It's my pleasure to tell you that our guest on this episode of Writers at Work is Walter Mosley, whose debut novel, Devil in a Blue Dress, published in 1990, introduced readers to Easy Rawlins, a young, hardworking Black man in pursuit of the American dream who becomes a private investigator. Now 50 and a grandfather, Easy returns in Farewell Amethystine, Walter's latest and the 15th novel in the series. Walter has written many other novels, plays, TV screenplays, nonfiction books, and short stories. They and he have been acknowledged with a National Book Foundation Medal for Distinguished Contribution to American Letters, an O. Henry Award, a Langston Hughes Medal, an AACP Image Awards, and even a Grammy. He was named a Grandmaster by the Mystery Writers of America, a recipient of a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Crime Writers Association, and is an inductee in the New York Writers Hall of Fame. All of that still falls short in telling what Walter Mosley means to American letters and to his fellow authors and readers. Walter Mosley, welcome to Writers at Work.
Why, thank you.
I want to talk to you about your latest novel and the arc of your career, but can we just take a moment to discuss the influence of the Irish novelist Edna O'Brien, who passed away recently, on you and your career?
Yeah, well, I met Edna when I decided I was going to be a writer. I decided I should go to learn about it, though I didn't want to spend $30,000 or $60,000 a year doing it. So I went to City College, which is great, and in the program, Edna was there for a year, and we got along famously, and she was just so wonderful. I just thought she was so great. I remember I had written a short story on these characters that I was developing, and and Edna read it, and she just kind of almost dismissively she said to me, "Walter, write a novel," and it was like, okay, and I went and wrote the first book that I wrote that ultimately got published, Gone Fishing, published by Black Classic Press, Paul Coates. But I was, I had such a wonderful time with her. I don't think I would have been writing novels if she hadn't said that day.
Is that so?
Yeah.
Wow. At that point, though, you were kind of like a fully formed adult. You had a poli-sci degree. You had traveled widely.
I was in my 30s.
Yeah, right. And you had your day job, and suddenly the light bulb goes off, and you think, I can become a novelist?
I wrote a sentence, which I've mentioned many times to many people, but I wrote the sentence one day in the 80s. On hot, sticky days in southern Louisiana, the fire ants swarm. I wrote that. And I went, wow, that sounds good. Sounds like books I've read and thought about. And it was fiction, of course, because I hadn't at that time never been to Louisiana or seen a fire ant. So I said, well, I'm making up stuff and I'm writing about it. So let's see where you can go.
What's funny about that sentence, Walter, is that it is a perfectly balanced sentence. If you had a seesaw, it would be perfectly balanced on both sides.
Well,
I love that sentence. No, I love that sentence. So back then, did you have a model and of how and who and what you wanted to write? Was there somebody that you saw as your star in the horizon?
Yes, that's so hard to say. It's a really hard thing. There were a lot of writers who I won't say influenced me because I wasn't thinking about influence at the time, but I'd read a lot of Emile Zola. I love what he was doing, and I think I had taken on. I had originally taken on the project of writing about all the different sections of Black America. Things that I knew that I never saw in literature, but. But then, when the first book that Edna asked me to write, Gone Fishing, was, rejected by all the publishers because they couldn't understand who would read it. The logic then was white people don't like Black people, Black women don't like Black men, and Black men don't read. So who's going to read this book? And so I just started again. And then another, a person, a couple of people, Ross McDonald, Dashiell Hammett, and people like that. I'm reading, all of those mysteries, which also, in another kind of way, try to tell about a different part of America, or not a different, many different parts of America,
Right.
and so then I decided to write a mystery. So I was using writers and writing as stepping stones, and less more like influence or anything like that.
Oh. So Devil in a Blue Dress arrives in 1990. I was thinking about this, Walter. I seem to recall that it was well received, but was it well received?
It was, yeah. I get a lot. The first review was in PW, and it was terrible. It says, over you, over written something 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 something. Might as well wait for the movie.
Oh
And
my,
one person, that's the first review I ever got.
my.
But I was so happy that somebody was writing about me that it didn't even bother me. But but then I got all these great reviews for Devil. Then we got made the movie. It was really fun.
Yeah, I recall that on the cover there was a white woman that I assumed was Daphne Monet,
Yeah.
and the black people in the background are musicians or jazz club owners. And as you know, Miles had to fight to have a black person on his album cover, but that was 1957. Was the industry ready for you and easy, or am I reading too much into this?
Um, were they ecstatic about it? No. Were they ready? Definitely. The reason they had it is because they said we can make money on this. So yeah, I think they were ready in their own kind of interesting way. you know. But I don't think that people were necessarily happy. I wasn't. That was my first book. First few books. I don't really argue with people who have their own jobs. They said, "Well, this is going to be the cover. It'll be really good." And I thought it was I really like the art of that cover. But as time went by, it became very clear that we need black people in these covers and in
Right.
these books. And Daphne Monet, is black, so the misdirect is not a bad thing to do.
Yeah, yeah, she's blonde on the cover, so
I know,
yeah,
I
yeah,
know.
but no, but yeah, and the thing is now you're writing this book that doesn't, I don't think, has much precedent, and you're doing it in the world of commercial fiction. So at what I mean, did you see that you had a clear field and you had this field to yourself, or was it just a field full of potholes of risk and danger for you?
But that's such a it's an interesting question that goes to a lot of different places. To begin with, when I started writing back then in maybe 87, 86, something like that, I, you know, I just wanted to be able to write a short story. That was my goal. I said, if I can write a story with a beginning and a middle and an end, and it would be fun to read, that would be happy. That would make me happy. So I wasn't even expecting to get published, to tell you the truth. I was just going through, you go through the things, you try to do it, but you don't expect it. And and so I was really happy. But actually, can you ask that question again? I want to go back to the first part of it.
Yeah, that you're trying this um, innovation, and you're doing it, however, in the commercial fiction world. So you can be innovative if you want to be, but the books have to sell also.
Yeah. You know, to begin with, um, there are precedents that they may. I mean, people write different kinds of books, right? So there are different styles, different ways, different sense of humor. But I think of Iceberg Slim, Donald Goines, Chester Himes.
Right.
I mean, there are a lot of people who had previously written very good books, mysteries, crime fiction, but so there was a lot of history there.
Yes,
Um,
but from a white reader's perspective, I remember reading Chester Himes and thinking that the book wasn't really meant for me. but that he was granting me a glimpse of a world I was unfamiliar with. I've always felt with your books that I was invited in to experience what you wanted to convey.
Yeah, that's me as a writer. I mean, that's how I see writing. I think, I think a lot of other people, that when they do it, they may exclude people, and this is, white or black, like Ed McBain, for instance. You're not really invited into Ed's books. A lot of people wanted to read them and enjoyed them, and saw them as exotic, maybe even saw them as writing that was not literature. But when I'm writing about my characters, I really want people to know. But I want to get back to another part of that question, though. Um, what's so interesting is, like, the other day I wrote a book. It's called Galen, A Romance in Black, and it's a lot of things. It is a romance novel, but it's also kind of in the tradition of the romantic movement, starting in 1750 and going to 1900. It's about uh, everyday people, and one of the things that always um, surprises me, because I'm not trying to do it, is most things that Black writers write about today, and have been since at least the 70s, if not the 60s, is new, because people don't usually write about um, Black people in all the various genres of literature, of which there are many.
Right.
So yeah, it's always different. It's always new. It's always a surprise,
Yes.
and we'll be over that one day, but not yet.
To get back to something you mentioned earlier about the first novel syndrome, we're sort of amazed that we're actually published,
Yes.
but then we have to sort of get down to getting better. Do you recall a point when you realized that you were a novelist and that you had the responsibility to be better and that your writing was actually improving?
That again, that's one of those questions that really it goes in a fork, right? It can go this way or it can go that way. Yes, of course, as I'm writing, I'm getting better. Part of it is just getting better because you're doing it and you realize mistakes that you've made and you've learned, and it festers in your unconscious, all of that. I think, for instance, that book I just mentioned, Galen,
Right.
um, is probably technically, it's like the best book I've ever written. But I don't think it's a better book than Devil in a Blue Dress, which is the first one ever published.
Right.
And what I'm saying there is that books belong to readers. Writers create them, but once they put it out in the world, it's out in the world. It's not theirs anymore. It belongs to anybody who wants to pick it up and read it. And I find, like one of America's big worst novels is also one of America's best novels, and that's Sister Carrie.
Right.
Sister Carrie is not a very well written novel,
Right.
and there's lots of problems with it, but it is so incredibly powerful.
You,
You
you,
you you really say, "Wow, this guy was way, way, way ahead of his time."
you just made me think of something, Walter, I've never actually thought of before. I wonder, when non-writers read novels, do they stop and say, wow, this guy's really good, or this guy's not so good? I mean, I wonder if they do that.
No, they do, and but the thing is their sense of good and maybe our sense of good might be different things.
Yeah, that's it. That's good.
Because somebody's reading a story, it's that in in the E.M. Forster's aspects of the novel,
Right.
when he said, when he talks about, who the reader is, he ends up thinking, well, it's this bus driver, who has this, paperback, in his pocket, and he picks it up and he says, yeah, this is pretty good. That's the guy you're writing for, you
Right.
know,
Right.
and this is one of the problems I think with universities, and because they begin to own literature. But universities in stuff like that, they really concentrate on history. So you say, well, Shakespeare and Proust, and and there's nothing wrong with Shakespeare and Proust, but it's just like when you're a writer today, you're writing for the world you're living in, for the culture you're living in, for the people that that you meet and interact with every day. And that's going to be different than Shakespeare, and it's going to be different than Proust, and but I think the university kind of tries to pull you back down into that.
Right. But all novels are historical fiction once their immediate time has passed,
Yes,
right?
and you might want to study that. Like
Right.
you might want to study the history of painting. But just because you study, Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo doesn't mean you're going to paint like them.
That's right.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's that balance of simply getting the thing done, and
Mm.
yet at the same time you're kind of discovering what it is you're really writing about. That goes
Well, yeah.
beyond story.
Hmm.
What is my story that it permeates everything I write? When did you start to see that you actually did have overarching themes and that there was something knitting your writing together?
Well, I mean, it's really some things, right? Because there's so many different things that one writes about, and that's influenced by so many, other things. Like, when I first started writing, I was 35 or just about, and now I'm 72. And so it's complete, a lot of the stuff that I pay attention to, I didn't pay attention to before. So in a way,
Mhm.
ideas and themes and things I've learned, have a really big there's big gulfs between them.
Right.
I know one thing that I've always done and I will always do is write about Black male heroes. That's simple, but it's so different.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you're saying, wow, but this is a black person doing this. So often people come to me, who aren't black, and they'll say, wow, this is the way I think.
Yeah.
I'm always like, oh, okay, yeah, good. I'm glad you saw that. You
Yeah.
know.
But I do think you convey um, you race is of course very prominent, but once the story begins to unfold, we're connecting on a human level with
Yeah.
the characters. And I know this is overly simple, but uh, perhaps it could be, black people are just like you. Could be
Hmm.
something as simple as that. It's probably not, but once you have a big body of work, certain themes arise. Too much. Anyway, can we just for a moment discuss the monographs, the year you write your novel, and elements of fiction?
Hmm.
Why did you decide to write and publish them?
Well, a lot of times when I would go out to do readings, people would ask me, "How do you do this?" or "How do you do that?" or "What is this?" and and so and I never have enough time to go through it like at a reading because it would take too long. And it would have to be organized in a certain kind of way. And so I decided to write those, too. And that's exactly what they are. They're monographs, uh, that discuss writing a novel. And then that's the first one. This year you write your novel, and
Right.
then the second one is elements of fiction is how you make that novels particularly your own. Which is a much harder thing to discuss.
Right.
And I just and I just said, well, if I write these books, then people can just and they can just buy it and or get it in the library, and that's why I did it. It's funny because I guess and that threw me all the way back to junior high school where they gave you Strunk and White, to
Right.
understand grammar, and I just always loved that book. It's not that I really understood it or anything or did very well or that I know grammar today, but I did really like it. And I said, well, if I can write a book about writing that's kind of like about the same size as that book, that'll be really successful.
Yeah. Forgive the flattery, but I really did find both of them to be inspirational. Particularly, I was already published by the time I read Elements of Fiction, But the overarching message I took was it can be done, you know, not like as a cheerleader. You make it very clear that writing a novel is hard work, but that overcoming the pitfalls is just part of the process.
Yeah.
And start putting down words. Maybe the best, most direct advice I've ever come across in a book
hmm
for writers.
it's really, it's so true. The idea of it. And one of the things you were asking me before about why I wrote it, I ran across so many books about writing um, that were so long, and they were talking about, I mean, they were talking about writers like, you don't want to compare yourself, to Melville or Shakespeare or what any of these people, because these, I mean, like, they're talking about the best of the best, and so, well, here's an example, from Dickens, and you put it in there,
They're
and you go,
yeah,
oh my God,
they're
I have to be
untouchable.
Dickens. Oh God, and it's just like, no, no, no. It's just like more like being a carpenter or a plumber or something like that. You just sit there. Only thing is that rather than working something externally, it's internal. It's in your brain that you're trying to find it. But it's very, very similar to, like any kind of technician.
Yeah, but
And I like that. What?
no, no. In addition to start putting down words, there was another one I loved, which was the story knows more. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
and that's something that it takes you a very long while to get that if you ever get there. I mean, and
hmm
and and how do we learn to trust the story while we're rewriting and editing?
Well, it's like I really do. It's a question of love. I think.
Yeah.
I think if you love what you're doing, or if you love someone, it's like, well, how do you trust them? You say, well, you just do. It's not, you don't think, well, how can I make, you don't think, how can I make it perfect? I think trust is a good word, because, if you want to make it perfect, well, you shouldn't be doing it. But if you want to, you want to just take one step at a time, getting further and further into that story, which is getting further and further into yourself, which then gets published and gets into all these other people, and then there's a dialogue going on. I mean, it's just you know the process of it. I love it, and it's been a lot of fun.
When you talk about character development, you say that when you're writing, you're in discovery mode. And I love
hmm
that. I love that phrase. Can you talk a little bit about in your process when you realize you're in discovery mode?
Well, sometimes you realize it and sometimes you don't. One reason I usually say things because, um, you know, it's something I realize when I'm writing it. So, like, I'm in discovery mode. It's just like, well, you realize that while you're writing. I'm writing a new Easy Rawlins novel right now, and um, I honestly, I have an idea of where I want to go from chapter to chapter, but I don't know where I'm going. And in the middle of chapters, I just discover things, and how things kind of fit together. It's kind of like doing a jigsaw puzzle, only it's one that doesn't have a predefined picture to follow. I just I and it's just, and it sounds hard, but it's not if you just like doing it. You start off, well, how do I start? I mean, Devil in a Blue Dress for me was great. I wrote that sentence. uh I was surprised to see a white man walk into Joppy's bar. That was like, that was so important for me. And by the time I finished that paragraph, I knew what the book was going to be.
I love this concept though, Walter, and I think emerging writers that will turn on a light for them. That you don't
Mhm.
need to know where you're going when you start.
Yeah. Well, that's
That's
another thing that I try to tell people all the time. The novel is bigger than your head. So if you do know, in a kind of an absolute sense, it's probably not good enough. You
wow.
know, is the idea that, I met this a Russian writer, I think he was, and he told me he knew every word, every sentence, every situation, every place in his book before he sat down to write it.
Mm,
And I was just like, wow, man, that's crazy.
that's a straitjacket.
I
Anyway,
think he liked it. Yeah, he must have lived in that straight jacket.
yeah. And talking about character development, it brings me to Farewell Amethystine. Um,
hmm
and this may be because I had seen the Denzel Carl Franklin version of Devil in a Blue Dress a couple of months ago, but I really found it surprising to find Easy where he is today. 50, a grandfather, lovely home. Um, and at one point, you have him saying, "Life was good. I had family and friends, money, and a safe place to live. I had a real profession that gave me satisfaction." At one point in the series, did you begin to think that Easy could have that sort of life?
Well, I think even from in the early books, in the first book, he had a house.
He did, yes.
And he became the detective because he wanted to maintain his house without having to, bow down to people. By the time we're in White Butterfly, which is the third book, he owns some property. He owns a apartment building, and he owns this and that, and he's bringing in money. And it's not just Easy. There are a lot of people in Easy's lives who are much more successful than he is. You know, Jewel, who used to be Mofas's wife, and now is married Jackson Blue. Jackson Blue, who's like the number one senior vice president of the largest insurance company in the world. Mouse, who's taken to planning heists and doing them all over North America. Because this happens. Everything is a little bent. Everything, not everything. And most people Easy meets, it's a little bent, but they're still doing it.
Right, right. Um, I always felt that Walter, boy, that Easy would have to persevere rather than simply live. And you make it clear to us that the challenges of being Black make that more likely, that perseverance precedes living.
Well, yeah, what's important to you? It has like little aspects of religiosity, but it's not religion. In this new book that I'm writing, Easy is he's sitting there in his office. He's talking to uh, his assistant, the assistant of the office, Niska. She wants to be a detective, but nobody else even can imagine a woman detective. And a guy comes in, and he's kind of, he's wearing these, dirty clothes, and he looks rough, he's a Black guy, and doesn't think he can trust him, but he decides to work with him because that's why he became a detective. He wanted to help people who didn't get help, who couldn't afford it, and even if they could afford it, people wouldn't give it to them. And so he decides to help this guy, even though he knows better. And I think that that's, but so you can own a mountain, but that won't save you from getting cancer. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You are who you are. If you mess with Mouse, he will kill you. It doesn't matter how successful he is or how much he could call somebody else to go do it. He will do it because that's who Mouse is.
Right,
You know.
right. Though I was thinking, okay, thanks to Walter Mosley, we're accustomed to having a Black man as the protagonist in a hard-boiled crime series. But can we accept that there's a contented man as the hero in a sordid society? I mean, what are the challenges for you of featuring a good man in a bad, bad world?
Yeah. Well. Yeah. It's funny. And there's so many like aspects to that. You know, Easy is contented at the beginning of Farewell Amethystin, but he is not by the end of it because he feels he has to make a decision that's gonna make him unhappy,
Uh,
and does make that decision. Now, is that going to last? No, it's not. In the next book, a couple of years later, she's going to come back, and you're going to go, oh, yeah, So I think it's a kind of a back at he's successful, in a kind of straightforward 1950s American idea of success. He has
yeah,
all he has money, he has a house, he has his kids that he's adopted. He hasn't been able to maintain a relationship with a woman. He just hasn't. And he can't see himself not being in his profession, even though he doesn't need to be anymore.
Without giving anything away, I just have to tell you that the last sentence of the Farewell Amethystine will echo in me for a very long time. You led us to that sentence so beautifully, Walter.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I say no more about that. Listen, you have been so generous with your time. Thank you
Oh,
so
well,
much.
thank you. It's fun
No,
to talk about writing. It's fun to talk about it in a way that's not exclusive. Because writing is, when you talk about writing to people, writing is something you can do. I was and just to add, this one thing that I usually say that I don't think I said in either of the monographs. Very often, young people, men and women, but it seems men more than women, ask me, "How do I know when a novel is finished?" And I go through the process of explaining, like it's almost zen because it's so repetitive. I say you read the book that you've written, you see what's wrong and you fix it. And then you read the book and you see what's wrong and then you fix it. And you do that like 20 times. And then at some point you read the book and you see what's wrong and you don't know how to fix it. Well, then you're finished. Yeah.
fantastic. Our guest on this episode of Writers at Work has been Walter Mosley. Walter, I say it again. Thanks so much for your time and insights.
Well, thank you. This is great.
Okay,
I
take
really
care.
loved it. Thanks a
Bye-bye,
lot.
Walter.
Bye.
Bye. Writers at Work is a production of Bliss Publications. Erin Mitchell is our producer. Music is by Joni Mitchell, performed by Keith Jarrett. For more, see writersatworkpodcast.com. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. Until next time, happy reading.